Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2025 EMFAF webinar. This morning, we have presentations from the three schemes that the Marine Institute are responsible for managing: the Data Collection Scheme, the Marine Biodiversity Scheme, and the Marine Knowledge Scheme. Two of those, Data Collection Scheme and the Marine Knowledge Scheme, are Irish-nominated EU projects of strategic importance. So that has added implications in terms of outreach and dissemination of results. So hence, there's quite an emphasis in this webinar on those programs. I'd like to welcome the EU Commission, the Irish Management Authority, DAFM, and members of the Monitoring Committee, the EMFAF Monitoring Committee, who are all invited partly because of the operations of strategic importance. Our agenda, we'll endeavour to keep on time. We have talks from Oliver Tully on fisheries data collection, Dave Currie on using frameworks to navigate lots of waves of marine data. We've Arjan Gittenberger online from the Netherlands. Then we have a pre-recorded series of 3 presentations from our data team. And finally, we'll wrap up with a short presentation on climate sentinel data and sentinel sites from Felix. If anyone has questions, please use the chat, enter your question into the chat, or email it to emfaf/info@marine.ie. We'll have about 10 minutes at the end, and we'll try and address as many of those questions as we can, and the speakers will stay on hopefully for doing that. So I think that's probably as much as I want to say as an introduction to this. So our first speaker is Oliver Tully. He's a team lead in Fisheries Ecosystems Advice Services, works on shellfish fisheries assessment and management options. And he also investigates the effects of fisheries in coastal SACs and SPAs in relation to Natura compliance. Ollie has a number of projects funded under the EMFAF Biodiversity Scheme and is responsible for data collection under the DCF. So it's with that in mind, Ollie, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Everybody can see my screen, Russell, yeah?
Yeah, that's good,
okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, welcome to this webinar, and welcome to the data collection framework, where all the fisheries scientists live. It's the core framework really for the supply and of data for fisheries assessment. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about just a component of that, which is what we call fisheries dependent data collection for inshore fisheries, which is the small scale kind of coastal fleet operating around the Irish coast. Sorry, yeah. So in summary, what is the data collection framework? And this is my Google AI summary, and I believe it. I've read it and tweaked it. It's an overall framework for the collection of data on fisheries at European level. So it reflects, I suppose, the objectives of the Common Fisheries Policy. And the Common Fisheries Policy is all about the sustainable exploitation of fish stocks in Europe, but more than simply biological sustainability, also about economic viability, maximizing or optimizing the resource rent or the profitability from fisheries, ensuring that that investment in fisheries is viable and has social benefit, and that there's a balance between the economic and social aspects of that, while operating in a sustainable way, and that we can maintain fish stocks at a highly productive level, and that increasingly we take into account the environmental effects of fishing, or we incorporate more as ecosystem issues into our data collection and our advisory process. It's a framework that guarantees more or less standards of data quality, accessibility, that everybody is doing the same thing to service the framework and therefore to service the common fisheries policy. And that involves a lot of people in Europe, a lot of scientists in Europe, a lot of fishery managers in Europe, that ensures that we gather data to the same standard, to the same criteria, and that can be used in a collective, integrated way to service the needs of the common fisheries policy generally. I'm going to talk about fishery-dependent data rather than obviously the opposite, which is fishery-independent data. And fishery-dependent data is data that originates really from sampling of commercial vessels and is acquired in some way during normal commercial fishing operations. So that's really what we mean by dependent on the commercial fleet for these data. The opposite of that would be to take a research vessel out to sea with a group of scientists on board to collect other types of data or to collect similar types of data. So those research surveys are separate to this, and also are a part of the DCF, obviously, but are different in terms of how the data are acquired and who acquires them, and the scope of that. And the scope of those fishery-independent data is a good bit different to what we're talking about today, which is fishery-dependent data. So a little bit more detail about that. So what is that in terms of what a vessel is doing at sea and how we're interacting with that to get data? Well, it's a simple enough schema, really, because a vessel will go to a fishing position, it will use a certain type of fishing gear and a certain quantity of fishing gear. It has an intention to do something, an intention to catch a species X, Y, or Z. It will catch that on board. It will retain some of it on board. It will not retain some of it on board, and it will also catch unintended species or a non-target catch, which may be commercial or non-commercial. We will collect and know information about how valuable that is to the vessel in terms of the unit value of that catch, and we also would be interested to know how much it costs to do that. How much? What are the operating costs associated with engaging in that fishing activity, and also the number of people engaged in that activity. So that's the type of data that we're trying to get to, and from which we can then derive, like say on the right-hand panel, derive the indicators and the information that we use and that we need further down the line in the process of assessing and advising fishery managers on what's going on at sea. And I suppose those indicators are then that can be derived, or we can produce a fishing heat map of some type from the fishing position data. We can derive indicators of performance, like what is the catch, how much did you catch per unit of fishing effort that you expended. We can get the size and age of data of fish that they caught, which is the basis really for estimating fishing mortality rates or the impact of fishing on stocks. And we also can collect information on profitability, this the economic viability of fishing. And that you could usefully divide into kind of what these are macroeconomic indicators at fleet level, and also the microeconomic indicators, which are telling us how profitable something is or how viable something is at a business level, at a fishing vessel level, and the basis by which fishermen make decisions each day. The value of what they do needs to be higher than the cost of doing it. And we'll see a little bit of that later on. the DCF generally is broader, of course, than what I'm talking today. So it involves fishery independent and fishery dependent data. And in Ireland, I suppose we can usefully disaggregate the entire kind of fleet into three components. That would be demersal, offshore, that's bottom trawl fishing in the main, pelagic offshore fisheries, the mackerel fishery and blue whiting, those big stocks offshore, and then this shellfish fleet, which is operating inshore, mainly inside 12 nautical miles. Now, it's not defined from a licensing perspective as a shellfish fleet. It's more or less a polyvalent fleet, but in recent decades, it's become specialized as a shellfish fleet and is increasingly specialized, in fact, in shellfish, that is crustaceans and mollusks, that is bivalves and whelk, which is now that fleet is very dependent on those fisheries. The inshore or the small-scale fleet in Ireland, this is the size structure of the Irish fleet, and about 80% of the registered commercial vessels could be regarded as inshore. There's no hard and fast definition of what we mean by kind of inshore. Here we would say it's definitely everything under 12, but I think everything under 15 really, because we have the same pattern of behavior of vessels between 12 and 15 and vessels under 15. So they are also specializing in shellfish and predominantly using static gears rather than bottom trawls. As you get into larger vessels, there's a higher likelihood of using bottom trawls and operating offshore. Not all these vessels are active in terms of, especially the under 10s. There's about 13 or 1400 vessels registered, not all active. And it's been a constant kind of objective over the last couple of years to assess the level of activity here. BIM will soon publish a new report on a census of inshore fisheries, which will be really useful in providing more information on this fleet. And it's pretty stable in terms of numbers, although recent and gradual declines, especially in the vessels between 10 and 12 and 12 to 15 meters. As I said, the landings and value in terms of what this fleet catches, they are specialized in shellfish. There's about 63 million euros worth of for sale value, over 1,000 vessels landing fish. And you can see how kind of reliant they are on a small number of species. Crab and lobster there account for half of the value, into about 30 million. And then there are other very important fisheries at more local levels, such as the razor clam fishery in the Irish Sea, the whelk fishery in the South Irish Sea, etc. But collectively, although some of these stocks are minor and local, cumulatively they add up to an important economic activity in certain coastal areas. So what data do we currently kind of collect? Well, on this inshore fleet, well, as I said, it's the molluscan and fishery and a crustacean fishery. And in terms of for mollusks and for bivalves, we have both fishery dependent and fishery independent data. We have survey independent estimates of biomass for most of the bivalves, and we have fishery dependent data for monitoring trends also in terms of biological and economic indicators. For the crustacean fisheries, that's the lobster and crab fisheries in the main. We're completely reliant on working with the commercial operators for data. We don't have any independent source of data on that. We have no research surveys. We have no sampling program that we could say is completely independent of the fleet, and that's a really important consideration, because this working relationship that we have with the inshore fleet and the commercial operators is so important for the continued assessment of that. Like the diagram on the top right is the universal kind of objective, I suppose, of assessing and advising on stocks. In terms of we're trying to get an indicator or a measure of the status of a stock, and to monitor that over time. So the stock status indicator could be absolute biomass, or it could be a performance indicator like a catch per unit effort indicator. But in all cases, we hope that that's a true reflection of changes in stock. In fact, most of the argument between science and industry is about the validity of that statement, really, whether we are measuring a true change in the stock status or not. If we're then able to monitor change in terms of stock decline, ideally we would have a harvest control rule in place already, which would then be activated to lead to some stock recovery. And we want to maintain stocks within certain levels and at a, ideally at a highly productive level, this target reference point, and to avoid the risk of stock collapse. This could also be economic. These could also be economic indicators in terms of profitability and changes in profitability over time. So we could then advise on, this balance between the capacity in the fleet and the capacity of fish stocks to sustain that level of activity. And there's been a lot of examples, let's say, where that is not balanced and where profits begin to decline, and fisheries begin to fail. So how do we get fishery dependent data? Well, that's where the big headache starts, really. If we consider how to interact with 1,000 fishing vessels operating around the coast, and how to get valid data, and how to maintain that over time. And over time is not like 2 or 3 years; it's over decades, really. And how to maintain continuity in that data acquisition over time is not a simple matter. So currently we have 3 kind of overlapping complementary programs funded by the ECF and procured through multi-supplier framework agreements within the Institute or between the Institute and the suppliers. The suppliers being skippers and owners of small-scale vessels. First, we have the Sentinel vessel program of about 75 vessels, which have been operating now for over 10 years and goes back further and has kind of evolved from earlier voluntary kind of logbook schemes that operated and that were implemented by BIM and the Institute before, let's say, 2012, before 2010. More recently, we have a framework with skippers, which we call the Skipper Self-Sampling Program, which is more or less viewing skippers as scientific observers, but they're self-reporting. So they're reporting exactly the same type of data as the scientific observers would. But of course, it's a much more, if you think of it, it's quite an efficient way of getting data because the skippers are already on board. They know what they're doing, and if we can get them to record data in the same way as a scientific observer would, then that's an easy, potentially an easy win. So we currently contract those guys for maybe 10, 15, 20 days per year to record data. And the third one, we have scientific observers contracted to work on commercial vessels. So this is like to cross-validate what's going on in number 1 and 2. We have scientific observers on board working on board vessels, which gives us the same type of information, but which we can then cross-validate with the other 2. There's a lot of work associated with maintaining these and procuring these services from the industry, and a lot of people around the Institute, from the procurement office to the finance office to all the people who in FIAS who digitize data, the inshore fisheries team who manage and coordinate this program generally. So it's not a simple program, and it's not simple to maintain, and there's a lot of work involved in it. And I suppose the issues we currently see with it is that is one, I suppose, maintaining interest and participation. There's a lot of reporting fatigue sets in the sector among skippers. I mean, they're earning some money from this program, but it's not a huge component or a significant proportion of their annual income. But they do it. They do it for a period of time. Some of them get tired of doing it. We get new people. So maintaining that interest and participation is an issue. We always have to be concerned with data quality control, and we're currently using paper-based systems which are cumbersome, which we have a lag in data management and digitizing data. And I suppose the level of participation in terms of, if you add it up, we may have 100 vessels reporting data to us out of 1,000 vessels that are landing. Is there bias in there, and are the participation levels still too low to avoid that potential bias? And it's difficult to know that, but we have to be aware of it and try to increase the participation of skippers. So we're thinking about future development, and we have some initiatives already in place. This year, we have changed from reporting. Sorry.
1 minute, if possible.
Yeah, okay. We're changing from paper-based to e-log to a form-based on phone. We're developing marine machine learning models a little bit, and we have some initial runs already, and we're automating the acquisition of the position data. So that gives you some new initiatives that we will and that we are implementing at the moment. In the middle there, we're tracking the fleet as a component of the fleet from the IVMS, which is another EMFAF project. We've rolled out the ESVP in using an Esri Survey 123 form, and we're developing machine learning models to automate data acquisition. We're reporting out this DCF data annually in the Shellfish Stocks and Fisheries review, and all of those species, that's where the data eventually goes to and is used for advising on the management of these stocks. That's on the Marine Institute library website. This is just an example from that publication of how we plot those trends, and this is data from all of the 3 programs, the SVP Observer and Skipper Self-Sampling program, in the same plot over time since 2013. So there's a cross-validation there across, that we can use to validate one across the other. So that's tracking a biological indicator in terms of the landings per unit effort and showing quite a high stability in this case. Another way of tracing an indicator through over a period of, let's say, 25, 30 years is this one used in a production model for brown crab. So we can either use these indicators as just a trend-based indicator or input those indicators into an assessment model, in this case for brown crab, which shows that we're now in an overexploited situation in this case. On the economic side, the economic indicators are reported mainly by BIM, and as I said earlier, this kind of is useful to divide these indicators into macroeconomic and microeconomic kind of indicators, and I think it's that's the type of data that we're trying to get to is the this, what's the cost basis of fishing versus the value of what they're taking out. And this is an example, let's say, of the cost structures associated with the one fleet, which is the dredge fishery for molluscan shellfish, bivalves mainly, 0 to 10 meter vessels and 10 to 12 meters. You can see the operating costs are the dominant costs in that fishery, and it's to make the point really about how important it is to track cost versus value. And here is an example of tracking profitability in the razor clam fishery in the Irish Sea, where we're able to forecast, let's say, what the net value of the catch is relative to the catch rate indicator on the x-axis in terms of the kilos of clams per hour, and then the ability of the skipper or the owner to continue to operate in a profitable way. The basis of this is that as the catch rate declines, the hours at sea and the cost of fishing increases. And we see this problem a lot in fisheries of chasing declining catch rates, which is eventually loss making. So the key implication is for looking at these microeconomic indicators is to maintain high catch rates and high stock levels is essential to maintaining profitable fisheries and guiding business investment in small scale fisheries. Yeah, that's just an example really of microeconomic and the use of economic indicators to advise on viability. Russell, I will leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Ollie. Sorry for rushing you. Okay, thank you, Ollie. Any questions, put them in the chat. Our next speaker is Dr. Dave Currie, team leader in fisheries ecosystem advice services in the Marine Institute. His role is data management, responsible for overseeing data storage, quality assurance and dissemination. He is currently the chair of the International Council for the Exploration of the Seas Data and Information Group. So Dave's talk is establishing a data culture using data frameworks to navigate the waves of marine data. Cheers, Dave. Thanks.
Hey, can you hear me okay and see my screen?
Yeah, Dave, just before you start, I meant to mention we are actually recording this session, so it will be available for people to view afterwards as a single recording. Thanks.
Okay. Hi, I'm David Currie, and I'm going to talk about how the Marine Institute has worked to establish itself as a trusted source of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data through internationally recognized frameworks, and how they've supported the handling of marine data, particularly around more complex cases like marine spatial planning. So before I start, although I'm giving this talk, I just want to acknowledge that there's lots of other people within the Marine Institute who have worked on this topic, and a lot of my talk is based on a paper we published earlier this year. So there's a number of colleagues here who've worked on that paper, and particularly Sarah Flynn was the lead author on that paper, and she's talking later today. So what are the challenges of marine data management? Now, some of these aren't specific to marine data management. They're quite common to a lot of environmental data collection. So the first challenge is that marine data is collected at a specific time and place. So although we might go out year upon year to do similar collections, obviously the world changes each time. So the data from a given year can't be reproduced. As Ollie mentioned, we often deal with long time series of data, and generally we need long time series of data to work in things like stock assessment models. So typically we'll be collecting data over multiple years, and a lot of changes of personnel, equipment, data collection methods during that period. And also it may be that we need to collect data for a certain time series before we can even use it. So there may be a lag in terms of 3 or 5 years before the data can actually be used effectively. Cost. It can be expensive to collect marine data, particularly if we're going out on dedicated surveys. So collecting fisheries independent data, as Ollie mentioned, on dedicated research vessels. Interoperability can be a particular issue. So this is where data is being collected by different groups or different teams, and it can be hard to make that data mesh together when you try and use it. So for example, people might be using different formats, or also people might be using different codes. So the same word might represent 2 different concepts for 2 different teams collecting data. Particularly in fisheries, we often work with commercial fishing vessels, so there can be confidentiality issues around the data we're collecting, particularly around like data collected from a particular given single fishing vessel. And also there may be personal data implications in terms of the skippers or the workers on the vessel. And also within marine data management, we're not a homogeneous group. There's different communities who work, and they're often working at a different pace. So in terms of making data open, things like physical oceanography tends to be more advanced because they don't have to worry about some of these issues around confidential and personal data that we have to work with in fisheries. So in 2017, our story starts. although obviously we've been managing data for a long time before that. At that point, we prioritized the adoption of quality processes and put in place a roadmap towards adopting frameworks with the objective of becoming a trusted source of high quality data with well-defined reproducible processes. So frameworks and certifications can build trust in marine data repositories by promoting consistent data handling. And within our roadmap here, I'm going to talk about 4 separate steps. So from 2017 onwards, we started to work towards accreditation under the UNESCO International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange Programme. And we gained accreditation as Ireland's National Oceanographic Data Centre in 2019. As part of this process, we developed what we call the Data Management Quality Management Framework. And this is aligned to the ISO 9001 standard, but it's not fully accredited to ISO 9001, which we'll touch upon next. And it's developed to guide data management activities from collection through to storage and then making it available for use and reuse. So as part of the QMF, we developed an overall model which provide a high level view of how we manage data. We also developed a quality manual to look at the processes in a bit more detail, and in particular, the quality manual is aligned to ISO 9001. And then the real meat of the QMF is in the implementation pack. So this consists of a number of templates, including things like data management plan, data requirements, process flows, and metadata related to the data process. And we complete these implementation packs for each data process we define. And as part of this, we have to define the data stewards, the data owners, and the data coordinators. And really, it's the data stewards in particular who do the majority of the work here. In 2020, we looked at our quality management framework and compared it to the full ISO 9001 standard and carried out a gap analysis. So we looked at the statements from the ISO definition in terms of the requirements, and those are broken down into descriptions about whether a process is compliant, whether it's effective, and is the process continuously improving, or in the ISO terminology, is there risk-based thinking? And then we started to look at how our quality management framework fitted with those. So generally, we found we were scoring very well on the compliance. So our manual and our model and our implementation pack allowed us to specify the things that should be happening. Where we were scoring lower on was in terms of where we're monitoring is the process effective. So not just what the process is doing, but is it doing it well? And also, could the process be better? So after analyzing 2 test cases, we realized that we had some more work to do on those 2 pieces. So I'll touch upon how we've carried on with that towards the end. Step 3 was 2021 onwards, and there's the research DM QMF. So the initial QMF work was limited to our operational work, and we put the research projects out of scope. And we wanted to do that to concentrate on our core work initially, and then we led into the research work. So the Marine Institute both funds research and does research, and the research DM QMF was developed to document research project deliverables. In particular, there can be problems when people are saying data's been delivered, but actually you can't find it anywhere, or it hasn't been published and made available to a wider audience. So the research DM QMF is specifically to support our research outputs. And step 4, which is 2022 onwards, was looking at a digital preservation framework. So up until this point, we've really been looking at sort of core MI operational work and the research work, but we wanted to expand that further so that we could take in data from third parties and have a controlled process for that. So we developed a digital preservation framework, and then we submitted an application for Core Trust Seal certification in support of this digital preservation work. And if you're interested, the data archival process follows the Open Archival Information System model, which is aligned to an ISO system standards. And there is a submission information package, an archival information package, and then a dissemination information package, which is defined. And the dissemination information package would be what's made available to the wider world. And we have achieved Core Trust Seal certification as our work as the National Oceanographic Data Centre. In terms of the results, we've currently, well, at the time of writing anyway, 135 data sets or data processes that are managed through the DMQMF. And we'd had 304 formal meetings, which are known as performance evaluations. And these are sort of our annual checks to see how the process is working and whether we can do things better with it. So I'm just going to mention 2 specific DCF examples, which are the mackerel and horse mackerel egg and larval surveys and the demersal catch sampling program. So the mackerel and horse mackerel egg and larval surveys take place between February and July, but only every 3 years. And the fisheries section in the MI is part of a consortium of 11 national labs from 9 countries that run this survey in collaboration. So I spoke to the chief scientist who's been running this survey for a number of years, and he found that the QMF provided a good framework in succession planning, particularly where you had new staff coming in recent years. Actually compiling these procedures into documents meant they could be handed over to other people. We want to make sure that we get everything as much as possible out of people's heads and written down so that we don't have reliance on individual people, that we have standard practices. It's a live process, so things can be updated quickly. And I'll touch upon this in the discussion. So he said it can be time consuming, but he found the benefits can be quickly realized. And our other DCF program that I wanted to mention here was the demersal catch sampling program. And as mentioned by Ollie, this is fisheries dependent data. So this is where we send either our staff or contractors out to sea on commercial fishing vessels, and they sample both the wanted catch and the unwanted catch, and then record that data. So in terms of this program, it's been running for a number of years, and it can be quite complicated in terms of finding trips, deciding who's going to go on a trip, what type of trip you're going on. So actually, once people started to look into this, it took quite a long time to really get the processes down on paper accurately. But it was useful to actually be able to see it all in one place. And again, particularly for training new team members, actually having the documents written down in one place rather than scattered or in people's heads is invaluable. And also the annual review means we are looking at our processes each year and seeing whether there's improvements we can make, things we can change, things we can do better. Generally, we found that having opportunities for continuous assessment and improvement has been a good result. Find customer satisfaction is better, and customers in this case we're really referring to sort of end users of the data or end users of advice that's based on that data. So delivering a more consistent product or more consistent services with well-documented processes is appreciated. We found we can reduce risk in some cases, so particularly where things aren't in someone's head anymore, and they're actually written down on paper. It means if someone's unexpectedly not able to take part in an activity, someone else can come in and at least have the documentation around what they're supposed to be doing. And we've also tried to identify places where there's reliance on one person. It helps with training opportunities, particularly for new staff or people coming into a new process.
1 minute, Dave.
Okay. And around the reuse of data, it's very useful. So often with fisheries, we're collecting the data for one purpose, but it may well be reused for other purposes like marine spatial planning. We've improved our plan Do Check Act, particularly related to the ISO evaluation I mentioned. So we've implemented things like action logs. We've been able to improve the amount of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data we make available. As new pieces of legislation come online, for example, the EU AI Act, we're able to combine that into our existing QMF processes. On the downside, it does take a lot of effort. So particularly around the data stewards, if they're doing work documenting data processes, they'll not be able to do certain other work. So it does require management of that effort. And just to say, the Irish Data Stewardship Network are using our work at the Marine Institute and others as real examples of the positive impacts of data stewards. And just to highlight, while the framework's offered structured guidance, it's really the people that are the key driver behind the success of the program. I don't have a picture of everyone in the Marine Institute here. I've just got a picture of the building, but there's very few people within the Marine Institute who haven't been involved in some level. And this involves them documenting processes, making time available for this work rather than other work, and having management commitment to that. So we feel we've got a strong data culture, and we're committed to continuing to improve that. And so with the continued support of leadership and staff engagement, we think we're well placed for marine data management into the future. So thank you for listening. Hopefully that was more or less on time. We come back to Teams.
Thank you very much, Dave. Again, if there's any questions, pop them in the chat or send them on an email to emfaf/info. Okay, our next presenter is our Marine Biodiversity Scheme project. The previous two were Data Collection Framework. So we have Dr. Arjan Gittenberger online from the Netherlands to talk about the mapping of the distribution of feral Pacific oysters, Magallana, gigas in Ireland. Thank you very much, Arjan. Take it away. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to give this presentation. It's about mapping Pacific feral oysters, indeed. I will start immediately showing what we have been searching for. We have been searching all around Ireland in 2024 and 2025 for oysters like the ones you see here in the front. That is settled on a rock, in this case in County Cork, not really close by any oyster farming. So how it arrived there, we don't know exactly. You do see some ships there in the back, so maybe it arrived from ports. We don't know exactly. But that's what we are searching for. And well, how did this project start? It started more or less, I think, with the principle that in the 1980s already the Pacific oyster was first cultured in Ireland. And in 2009, for the first time, a complete survey was done all along the coastline to see whether feral Pacific oysters as a result of the culturing of oysters were settling around Ireland. And well, that gave the following results in 2009 on where oysters were found. And what we are now doing is looking for the situation about, let's say, 10 years later. So this is the situation 2009, 2012, and 2013. There were 2 surveys there, especially in Lough Swilly. They're completely in the north, high densities, and in the Shannon estuary, a bit more to the south. And there were some records also on the west coast at that time. But I must say, looking at the articles in more detail, you have to be a bit careful because, for example, these records here in Carlingford on the east side, that was indicated in the publication that these oysters may actually be oysters that were simply lost out of the bags of an oyster farm. So they may not be feral oysters. And that's one of the reasons there's a difference with our study now. In our study, when we were in an area where there were oyster farms around with bags, we only scored something as a feral oyster if it was really settled on a substratum outside of the bags. And we would not score an oyster as feral because it was just a loose oyster lying around. And those kinds of oysters we saw in more or less all areas with oyster farming. Well, we collected and documented a lot of data. You don't have to read this all. I think some of the more important things is that in total we did 171 surveys of about 30 minutes each, a bit longer usually. We scored in those 171 locations all around Ireland, mainly in Inland Bays, 30 times Australia adelus, so the native oyster, and 70 times the Pacific oysters. We searched about 125 kilometers of the coastline for 95 hours, and we did that on average about 30 minutes away from low tide. We were in general a maximum of 1.5 hours away of low tide, so before or after that we were searching to make certain that we could really find these oysters in the intertidal. And then we measured oysters in total 2,248 ones, and we also indicated with a GPS where they were exactly, so for each oyster separately, and we scored on what substratum they were found. Then we also, at certain places with higher densities, we did some transects, like you can see on the picture below. These poles, they are 1 meter in size each. But quickly going on to the nice results. The main thing that we did is timed surveys, so at least 30 minutes. And then in an area, we always made a photograph of how the area looked. So we scored about how the habitat was at that place. And then we tracked exactly the track that we walked. That's the blue line that you can see below. And the red dots, those are the oysters that we found. If there were really high densities, we did not score the GPS coordinates of every oyster. We only scored that in the 30-meter transects. But at most other locations, we did score that. And then we always made photographs of where the oysters were settled. So you knew the habitat or the substratum they settled on. And we measured all oysters, as you can see above. In this case, this is centimeters on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you see the number of oysters that fall in that category. That was timed surveys. In those timed surveys, we checked how many oysters we would find in general, so how many oysters per square meter. But when we did these surveys and those timed surveys, they were done in a similar way as the surveys were done in 2009 and 2012 and 2013. We now also included distinct habitat surveys, and the reason we did that was that we noticed that very locally, suddenly you could see a habitat that had much, much higher densities of oysters than the complete surrounding environment. This was mostly piers, as you can see here, for example, in Kenmare River, where only on this pier, we actually found 78 oysters per square meters, on average in 30 square meters. There were also square meters where we found 150 oysters per square meter. If you would then look in the neighboring timed survey track, we would only found 3 oysters per square meter. So yeah, we thought it was very important to also do additional surveys in these distinct habitats, because we believe they are one of the main sources of oysters also for the surrounding environment. And if you want to focus management, maybe you should do that on those distinct habitats. This also shows the importance. For example, we also had a distinct habitat here in Parkmore Pier in Galway Bay, probably known for by many of you, or some of you. On that pier, we really had a very high density of feral oysters, and what you could really see is that there was a clustering of feral oysters in the surrounding environment very close to that pier. That really shows that the pier is one of the sources. The environment and the habitat all around the blue line down there, that was more or less the same. So that was not the reason that we had that clustering. And we saw this several times, where there was a certain small, relatively small habitat, maybe only 30 square meters or 30 meters in total, that had a really high density of oysters. And then that's probably the source population of some. Then another result that was interesting was that just over 50% of all oysters that we recorded, all the feral ones, were located on boulders. If you see an area like this in Woodstown Strand in Waterford Harbour, it was actually not that difficult to find the oysters. These oysters were all on the boulders and not so much in between. In some areas you would have a picture like this where there was only 1 or 2 boulders. You could not find any feral oysters anywhere, but you would walk to those 2 boulders and you immediately find the feral oysters. So there are ways to, yeah, really try to find them. We actually made a difference between oysters that were fixed on fixed substrates like this. This is the boulder cannot simply float away or cannot be washed away. And oysters that were on loose oysters, loose feral oysters, we see as oysters that can in principle be picked up by the currents and well, transported over large distances, especially if there are seaweeds growing on them. And that we actually found at several places, that at a high water level, so the high water line, we actually found quite a lot of live oysters, all with attached seaweeds to them. And what we then found out is that if an oyster had settled on another oyster, then actually in 43% of the times there was a seaweed growing on it. If an oyster was not attached to another oyster but lay completely loose, then it was only 17% of the oysters that had seaweeds on them. Probably those oysters were so light that they rolled around and then seaweeds could not easily attach. The attachment of seaweeds is quite important because it really looks like a kind of natural dispersal capacity that these oysters have. If they have seaweeds on them, then they can drift over larger distances. Regardless of the seaweeds, if you look down there to the loose feral Pacific oysters, it was apparent that 31% of the loose-lying Pacific oysters were actually settling on other oyster shells. Only 3 on other shells, so not Pacific oyster shells. And then you must be aware that there were many more other shells generally around than Pacific oyster shells. So they really had a preference for Pacific oyster shells. We also found 43% on pebbles. But if you look at the picture there, you can see there are thousands of pebbles lying around. And so now and then there are relatively a very small number of oyster shells lying around. And still the number of oysters that we would find on oyster shells and the number of oysters that we would find on pebbles is more or less similar. So there we really found a clear preference for oysters settling on oyster shells. So be aware that really the presence of oyster shells or oysters in a region boosts the settlement of extra oysters there. Then we go to the distribution all around the country. What you see on the left is our estimates of how the densities of oysters in the different bays, just over the complete time track. That can be 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers that we walked. And then we estimated or we calculated the same densities also based on a maximum density in 30 meters and a maximum density in 5 meters. What you can see is the maximum densities becoming higher. So the darker the colors, the higher the densities that we recorded. What this actually shows is that oysters are very much clustered together. So you do not have oysters equally distributed over a region. They are always more or less in clusters. This is another example I want to show that gave some clear insights. This is in County Dublin, in the port of Dublin actually. We found one feral oyster on a car tire. And actually, it was really easy to find. We just walked in the port. It was all mud and sand. I saw this one tire a few hundred meters in front of me, walked there, found the oyster. It shows that there are really specific habitats where these oysters are. And if you would keep the bottom clean in a port like this, actually, maybe it would even be a possible measure to reduce chances of oyster settlement. Another aspect that we found, like you can see here in Donegal, is that actually there you see all those white dots where we did not find any oysters. In many of those bays, actually there is oyster farming. We did not find a direct connection always between if there's oyster farming, there are oysters. Sometimes there are, sometimes they're not. But what we did see is that if you look more at more inland areas, like in the Swilly, where those red dots are, there you always tended to get higher numbers of oysters. That's actually the same in County Galway. There you also see those locations 70, 71, really in close to Galway. There by far we found the highest densities of oysters. And we believe it is probably has to do something with the longer residence times of the water there. This is again here in County Kerry. This is in Kenmare River. There you also clearly see the more inland you go, the higher densities of oysters we would record. This is the last county I want to show. We have these pictures for all countries, just to show that we actually found quite a lot of locations now also in the south of Ireland where oysters were settled, while in 2009, during those surveys, none of these locations had any oyster settlement visible. And that's actually, I think, more or less our main result here also. Feral oysters have really settled all around Ireland. We do not know exactly why they are at one place or another, but probably diploid or triploid oyster farming has something to do with it. The presence of bays has something to do with it, shelter for the currents, availability of substrate availability. It sounds all difficult, and that, yeah, well, there is, not everything is clear, but what was clear, that we have several very clear local distinct habitats, often pairs, that certainly play an important role as source populations. They can be cleaned. Additionally, boulders are clearly the primary settlement substrate of feral oysters, and Pacific oysters tend to preferentially settle on other Pacific oyster shells, meaning that also at oyster farms, if you would put the dead oysters above the high water line, for example, you have less chances that feral oysters would settle there than if you would leave dead oyster shells under the high water line. Well, all of these insights, they may help identify strategies to mitigate the impact and further spread of Pacific oyster, both within Ireland and internationally. And just for everybody's interest, our side product data set, we also found actually quite a lot of flat oysters during our surveys, but I must say that flat oysters certainly prefer the subtidal. So these were all flat oysters that were found in the intertidal, and they're actually still quite widespread throughout Ireland. Thank you very much.
That's super, Arjan. Thank you very much. My apologies, I left out your biog at the start, but just to say that you have worked in the natural history museums of the Netherlands, France, and USA. You've worked for National Geographic, Expert Centre of Taxonomic Identification, and a large number of EU networks. And you are holding an assistant professorship in Leiden University Institute of Biology. So apologies for leaving that out at the start.
Oh, no problem.
Great. If you hang on, there may be questions later, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. Moving into our marine knowledge scheme area, we have 3 presentations now, which were pre-recorded by our data group. Rob Thomas is our Ocean Climate Information Service Group Data Coordinator, and he's joined by Sarah Flynn, an experienced data specialist, Kellie Heney, who is our experienced GIS analyst and developer, and Gerald Lyons, who is our data services engineer funded under EMFAF. And he is focusing on processing and visualization. So if Julie can set this in motion, that would be great. I'm not getting sound.
I'm
Julie.
Rob Thomas. I'm the Ocean Climate and Information Services Data Coordinator here at the Marine Institute. I'm going to take a few minutes to walk through how our data pipelines are helping standardize how we publish our data. The best way to highlight the value of using standards is when standards don't align. In this example, depending on the location and your choice of drink size, you might not quite get what you were expecting. So standards are important because they establish consistent protocols that enhance reliability, compatibility, and interoperability amongst products and services. They also facilitate innovation, reduce cost, and simplify processes. Where there is an absence or non-alignment of standards, we can understand the statistic that 80% of data science is spent on data wrangling. Dataset metadata and data format specifications are examples of technical standards, and used in conjunction with community or domain vocabularies, this helps create a shared language that enhances communication and understanding. A typical search for data, when not through a web search engine, might be through an organization's data catalog. In Europe, the data catalog contents are required to follow the INSPIRE standard. The metadata descriptions, depending on the granularity and summary nature, may not always be as useful as we hope. In the first example, the bounding box that covers the data actually covers a larger area. And in the second example, a time series might not be as complete as the dates to and from might indicate. So when searching for data, this may lead to data sets being returned from a catalog search, which is not as relevant as we might expect. Once data sets are identified, the actual data may not be available for download, might be available in a variety of formats, and may be labeled inconsistently across the data sets. This can make integrating for use difficult, and in these situations, further standardization is our friend. Looking more closely at the contents of the CTD dataset, we can see that the dataset is a collection of individual points, each one representing a profile through the water column at a specific location and time. These could be considered data granules within the larger dataset. If we want to look at a more high-resolution look at the environmental data held within a dataset, these tend to fall under 4 main categories of data shape in terms of points, profiles, time series, and trajectory. Further defining metadata around these data granules provides a high-level resolution to the search functionality. And in particular, granules can be mapped to defined locations that have complex shapes. Within Europe, there are a wide variety of reporting areas defined under different legislation. In this example here, you can again note a difference between the Celtic Seas, depending on whether it's ICES or the MSFD definition. By mapping data granules to these reported areas, we can facilitate more accurate data search depending on the use case. When looking at parameters, in addition to enhancing the location metadata, there do exist a set of knowledge graphs which describe the parameters or variables contained within the datasets that can be used to infer further relationships between use cases or user groups without need to remap datasets. In the example here, leveraging the knowledge graphs enables data granules that are identified with this particular parameter of salinity to be searched through a more general hierarchical search, or linkages through to the essential ocean variable categories, or also inferred depending on the MSFD descriptor of interest. So this shows an example with salinity, and this shows an example for nutrients, specifically nitrate in the water body. So by enhancing the descriptive metadata associated with the granules that comprise our datasets, we can enhance the user experience of finding and accessing the data we hold, regardless of their purpose behind their search. Having now created a metadata lake with the enhanced metadata descriptions of the data granules, we can use this information to streamline and standardize our pathway to our data services. In the example shown here, a dashboard has been compiled using Microsoft Power BI to generate a user interface to interrogate the metadata lake. As users search by the geographical options or parameter hierarchies, they will see only the component of the overarching datasets that are relevant to their search. This first example shows that when selecting the proposed DMAP area off the southeast coast, the relevant datasets reduced to 9 from the original 32, showing 4,000 granules rather than the full 42,000. For each dataset, the data catalog record is available from the link associated with the dataset name, and the results can further be refined by selecting from parameter options. In this case, the D5 descriptor specifically around nutrient levels. Once a user has finished their search, subsetted data are available from download from the CSV links displayed. Alternatively, if a user wants to focus on a single data set, it can be selected by clicking on it here. In a similar way, data from a particular year or month can be selected. And additionally, where a data set has its own dashboard associated with it, these are available as well from the links on the dashboard. So I'm just going to finish with a view of the data that are available for Galway Bay in June of each year, and show that, in summary, by working at a data granule level and enhancing the data, we can not only streamline our publication pathway through standardization, but provide an enhanced user experience to find relevant data regardless of the use case. Future work will expand the number of datasets published and are made available through this pathway.
Good afternoon, my name is Sarah Flynn. I am the Marine Environment and Food Safety Service Data Coordinator at the Marine Institute, and I'm going to present our work on implementing digital analysis and visualization tools to analyse and present data and information in meaningful ways for key stakeholders within the Marine Institute and partner agencies. And this work examines designing guidelines and templates to provide consistency in how data and information products are presented externally. So adopting best practices in data analytics and visualization is essential for maintaining high standards of data quality and integrity, which in turn drives trust and transparency across the Institute. It ensures compliance with regulatory requirements while balancing data security and protection. By standardizing processes, these practices improve the quality of decision-making and enable data reusability and scalability. They also foster cross-functional collaboration, optimize operational efficiency, and reduce costs. Ultimately, strong data analytics and visualization practices reinforce effective data governance and create a solid foundation for innovation and advanced analytics. Establishing a robust technical setup with standardized environments and governed data connections ensures reliability, scalability, and optimal performance across platforms. Integrating with Active Directory enables centralized role-based access control, strengthening identity management and auditability. Control publishing through structured test, development and production pipelines and certified content minimizes the risk of inconsistent or unverified dashboards. Strong security controls, including data encryption, row-level security, and continuous monitoring, protect sensitive information and maintain compliance. And collectively, these practices create a governed, secure, and trusted visualization ecosystem that delivers accurate insights with confidence and control. Through EMFAF, a best practice guide has been developed to implement digital analysis and visualization tools. These guidelines will underpin how data from a range of disciplines and programs will feed into marine environmental reporting and data products, cross-organization decision support tools, and enhanced data visualization capabilities based on high quality, reproducible, and transparent information. The checklist on your screen has been developed and piloted to ascertain the needs of each new data visualization. The checklist merely asks the right questions to help end up with a fit-for-purpose visualization. The requirements contains the problem statement, what needs to be addressed or displayed, information about the data source, and some indication around the visuals being requested. It also contains the solution availability, whether it's internal or external, and what acceptance criteria might be required in order for the visualization to have delivered its desired outcomes. The solution contains information on the data model, the solution visuals, and information around the data frequency. Business rules are crucial to ensure longevity and secure operationalization over time and should contain information on elements such as the data source, any notable efforts or distinguishable elements, any transformations that have taken place, each specific element that has been developed, and this includes maps and tables and graphs, and each entity and who it's been signed off by, and any exceptions or guidelines to assist in both the testing and regeneration of the solution into an alternative technology platform into the future. So whilst capacity building is high on the list of priorities at the Marine Institute, there are occasions when support is required from those with detailed technology experience on how to go about developing the most appropriate visualization dashboard. When a request for support comes into IS&D, the first question must be, what is the most suitable technology? This illustration on the screen attempts to highlight the decision process required, representing all the components I've just explained. Whether it's an individual developing a single-use dashboard or if it's to be publicly available, the same standardizations must apply. And as this is constantly evolving with each new use case, it will remain a best practice guide for the foreseeable future. However, over time, it is envisaged that this will progress to a policy document with underlying supporting processes in place. I'll now pass you on to my colleague Kellie, who will present to a demo of one such dashboard. And I invite you to consider all the best practices I've touched upon that enables the delivery of such a solid, governed, secure, and trusted visualization ecosystem. Because behind her very impressive data visualization demo lies a great deal of thought, consideration, and documentation to ensure its longevity and fit for purposeness for all stakeholders. Thank you for your time.
To access the licensed aquaculture viewer, head to dafamaps.marine.ie/aquaculture-viewer in your web browser of choice. When you open the viewer, you will see Ireland, as well as several blue polygons around the coast. These blue polygons are all of Ireland's licensed aquaculture sites, and this public aquaculture viewer was designed as the key multi-tool that will allow the public to navigate, interrogate, and learn all about these aquaculture sites. The two main functions of this viewer are searching and reporting. And today, I'll quickly highlight a few of its key tools. Firstly, we have the table of contents over on the left. This tool will show you which layers are available in the map, as well as give you control over whether they are visible or not. And in this table of contents, we have the aquaculture sites layers, as well as several protected sites layers, including the special areas of conservation, special protection areas, and shellfish waters directive areas. I'll begin by using the simple search tool, which is located here on the right side of the screen. To search for a licensed aquaculture site, all you have to do is type in the site ID and click search. The map will zoom to the site you just searched for and highlight it in red on the map. Then you can click on the result in the result panel here to open a pop-up with the site summary information. We can now turn on some satellite imagery to get a better look at what is actually happening at this aquaculture site. Depending on the clarity of the water and the date the satellite imagery was taken, we can often see the aquaculture activity directly in the viewer itself. Another thing you might wish to do from here is to measure how close the site is to land. So we can just click into the measure tool here, select distance as the measurement option, and measure away. Lastly, the radius search tool, which is right here in the upper toolbar. This tool allows you to enter the site ID of an aquaculture site and identify all other aquaculture sites and protected sites that fall within a specified distance of the site you are interested in. So type in your site ID and decide how large of a radius you wish to use. By default, this is 15 kilometers. Then click Search. The yellow circle here is the radius, and your results will appear here in the side panel. You can see that there are 67 licensed aquaculture sites within 15 kilometers, 10 SACs, 2 SPAs, and 7 shellfish waters directive areas. You can then click on each heading to see more. Here you will see a list of all the aquaculture sites that fall within 15 kilometers, as well as their distance from your target aquaculture site. Then you can click into each site further to see that site's pop-up information. Now, this is particularly useful for SACs and SPAs because you not only have access to the site name and distance, as well as the attribute details, but you also have access to the MPWS external documentation through this link here. If you ever need more guidance on what a particular tool does or have any questions on how to do something in the aquaculture viewer, click on the FAQ link in the header. This page includes a tool glossary as well as an FAQ with some helpful tips on using the viewer.
Hi, I'm Gerald Lyons and I'm a data services engineer here at the Marine Institute. I'm going to speak to you about how recently we have made improvements in our spatial data services. Just a small bit of context to start. The Marine Institute hosts a national oceanographic data center. As part of this remit, we manage over 700 data sets. We are involved in data acquisition, collection, processing, quality assurance and reporting of terabytes of data every year. In short, we are responsible for data and data services. We build data products and visualizations, but we also make data available for use by government, agencies, industry, and the public in general. When we talk about spatial data, we are referring to data at a recorded location or data that has a spatial context. We generally deal in two different types of spatial data. Vector data, seen here on the bottom left, points and lines at a location, and raster or image data, seen here on the right. To make our spatial data available, we leverage a software by a company called Esri, specifically a software called ArcGIS Server. What this server allows us to do is to create a digital library of spatial data which can then be accessed by users to reference or build out a product, for example. And it's also available to ourselves to build out our own data platforms, products, and visualizations. We have over 500 layers available on our ArcGIS servers. The big improvement we have made in this space is we have consolidated our ArcGIS server infrastructure. Each ArcGIS server needs a dedicated virtual machine to run on. Over time, we have built out a dispersed architecture of 8 production ArcGIS servers with our 500 spatial layers spread across each of these servers. This setup was a significant management overhead. For example, if there was a major software update released by Esri or an operating system upgrade needed, each server would have to be updated individually. There's also a cost per license of each ArcGIS server instance you have deployed. The improvement we made was to consolidate our infrastructure. We reduced the number of production instances down to 2. This change makes our data more accessible easier to find, and it reduces duplicative effort. Our maintenance and upgrade processes are now streamlined, and in general, the software is easier to manage. This slide just shows our data catalog. This is a resource that has a record of all our data sets. If you wanted to see if the data set you were interested in had a spatial context, you would find the ArcGIS server entry by following the steps outlined here. The slide just shows some of the data products that we have built and access the data from our ArcGIS servers. In the middle there, we have our Marine Atlas, one of our well-known data products. Then we have Aquamis, which you have seen earlier on the left, and the Infomar viewer on the right. These are all just examples of the type of products we build out that leverage our ArcGIS server infrastructure. And then just to close, the Marine Institute hosts a National Oceanographic Data Centre. We are responsible for data, supporting stakeholders with data-driven decision-making. ArcGIS servers are one way we make data accessible. Our architecture is now consolidated and leverages the latest supported software from Esri. This will enable future services and platforms to be built, but also help to improve and complement our existing data products. This infrastructure project aligns us to the data goal of collect once, reuse many times. And that's all from me. Thanks for your time.
So that completes the Marine Data Group presentation. And just to say that some of those guys are in this webinar and will be staying on for questions at the end. So thank you very much to the data team for that presentation. Okay, our final presentation is from Felix Sproul. Felix is a marine scientist with a background in finfish and shellfish production in aquaculture, particularly in terms of changing climate. He was responsible for the harmful algal blooms, shellfish safety for human consumption program, and currently he's managing the climate EMFAF Sentinel Site program, which includes 3 Met Ocean buoys on the west coast. So Felix, do you want to take it away there? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Russell, and thanks everyone for waiting around. I know it's getting close to lunchtime now, so thanks whoever stuck around. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about, I guess, adding a Sentinel site to the Burshul Catchment Monitoring Programme, which is the most recent one of the Sentinel buoys that's gone in. It went in September, so I'll just give you a bit about the Sentinel programme first, and then a bit more about that buoy that's gone into Newport recently. So a little bit about the overview of the presentation. I'll be just kind of run through the site locations and also the other sites, where they are, kind of what kind of data is collected, and then I'll focus in a bit more on the Lough Furnace buoy in Newport and just kind of some of the things we have on that with dashboards and getting the data on AirDAP, and then just a quick look at some of the early data that's come off the buoy in the last couple of weeks, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at there. So I guess these sites are important from a climate monitoring point of view, but also to kind of see how these affect the aquaculture around these sites and the fisheries. So a little bit of an overview on the Sentinel sites. They're basically ocean climate monitoring buoys, but unlike the Met buoys that we have that are out further in the deep ocean, these are located in coastal areas, and they measure the EOVs, which are the essential ocean variables on things like temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen. We have 3 locations all on the west coast at the moment. It's an EMFAF funded project, and like I said earlier, there's some of them that have been in there for a month, and then there's others that have come from previous projects like the Compass project, that have been in for 7 or 8 years. And the data that's captured is relayed to near real time to the shore. So I'll give a bit on that as well. And it's all published publicly. And then we have a maintenance schedule, and of course working with the QMF team to ensure that the data is accurate. Some of the Sentinel site benefits, and I guess why it was set up, is to kind of get a better understanding of climate change and also how this impacts the ecosystem and the animals that live in these ecosystems, and how they can adapt to the changing temperatures or other conditions in these areas. Like I said, they're based in areas where aquaculture is undertaken a lot of times, both shellfish and finfish, and other sites are located right beside the Marine Institute research station for aquaculture in Poole, to get some direct comparisons there. And also, I guess, about building capacity on how we can expand this to other sites and other areas to kind of build our capacity to monitor these places all over Ireland. And then also to make this information available to the public and also kind of to policymakers and so on. A little bit about the site locations. The first one was Mace Head, which started in June 2018 and was kind of started by the chemistry team. This site was picked because it's quite close to Mace Head atmospheric climate station, and one of the main things that they're looking at there is the CO2 in the water there. The next one then was Poole, which was deployed in March 2024. Like I mentioned, that's the one beside the aquaculture research facility in Poole. So that has been going on there. And then the most recent one deployed was in Lough Furnace in September this year, and it's been in roughly 2 months at this stage. And I guess that was deployed in Burshul catchment in relation to other monitoring that has been going on there for the last 70 years in relation to salmon and eel monitoring, and I guess how they're affected. And there's been climate data collected there for the last 50 years, and this will aid this to kind of show a better timeline of what's been going on there and how climate has been changing in these areas. So that's the one in Lough Furnace that we'll be looking at now in a bit more detail. Some of the data that's been collected there, we have a seabird that's collecting CTD data and dissolved oxygen, and also a multi-parameter sonde that has several different things, including pH and chlorophyll and turbidity. And they're mounted on a frame, and this frame was built by P&O, and that profiles every 6 hours to go up and down to kind of get a better idea of what the bottom of the water looks like, because it's quite stratified and it's an anoxic tidal lagoon. They're measured every 1 or 2 minutes, depending on if it's profiling or not. We also have a CO2 sensor installed on the surface, and also the team out there take water samples on a monthly basis to get a better idea of what's going on out there, and also to verify the system. Here are just some pictures of the Lough Furnace buoy being deployed. It's a little bit different to the other buoys that we have, which are more or less straight up Met buoys, whereas this one is a custom built to include the housing for the winch and that profiles, but then also kind of keep a low profile and a darker color to blend in with the local area, just because it's a bit closer to certain habitation. And then, yeah, some pictures of it being deployed 2 months ago, and also where it currently sits. The data is then transferred to the Marine Institute in near real time, because they're kind of close enough to shore. Cellular data can be used for that, and they're relayed every 2 hours, and then it's parsed into our SQL database through the MDAS system, and it's also available on ERDAP soon. So the Poole and the Mace Head data is available on ERDAP, whereas the Lough Furnace data is just being quality controlled and checked and compared to the data that's currently coming off the old buoy there to ensure that everything's correct there. The data is available on the Connect dashboard, which you can, I guess, search for, or you can use the link here, or the QR code to get to a link, or you can send me a message afterwards. I'm happy to send it on. We have one for all the 3 sites, but this one here gives you an idea of the Lough Furnace buoy, and you can look at the data in real time, but also look back on data that's collected in the past. Here's another look at just some data that's been plotted from the buoy. As you can see, from the temperature side of things, coming into the winter time, you have the colder water up on top, and you have the warmer water down below that, and you have a thermocline there. That's also visible in the salinity. You have low salinity at the top, and then you have the heavier high salinity water down the bottom. The exact same thing with the dissolved oxygen. You have high oxygen water on top, and then down below that there's a layer of anoxic water that doesn't have any oxygen in it. And then there's an interesting, I guess, view of the chlorophyll levels. There's some chlorophyll in the top water, there's some chlorophyll in the water that's in the bottom, but there's not much on that layer between the fresher and the saltier water in the middle. And then also a quick look at some PCO2 data that's come off the buoy in the last month or so, just to kind of give you an idea of that. which I guess is important in climate change, in ocean acidification, and how that affects particularly the shell-forming species. A bit on ERDAP, so all the data that comes off that is uploaded to ERDAP automatically, so all that data can be downloaded publicly. Like I mentioned, the Lough Furnace data is still work in progress. We're reviewing that to make sure it's all quality control before it gets uploaded to that. But then the other data from Mace Head and from Liana Poole is uploaded and it's available there. Just some future plans on the buoy, or the buoys in general. So like I mentioned, the evaluation of the new buoy compared to the old buoy to ensure that all the data is accurate. Then also we'll be creating some data products off the data coming off that to just make it easier for scientists to view the data and to better understand what's going on there and to use that for further research. And that also feeds it with some dashboards to kind of get a better overview of the data coming out. Also part of is communication and outreach to give it to the wider community to kind of let people know that this data is available and that it can be used, how to access this, and what it can be used for. The ongoing maintenance is a big thing to ensure the quality of the data. The sensors are calibrated on a regular basis to ensure that they're all working good and the data is coming off it is good. And then also we're looking into getting additional sensors on what else we can monitor there to build up a better picture of what's happening. And then also, of course, funding the ongoing maintenance, the additional sensors, they're not cheap. So we're always looking for ways to build capacity there. So that's it from me. Thanks very much to everyone on the team, especially the P&O staff that have been hugely helpful for creating the buoys and maintaining them. The scientists from all the sites that help to keep the thing running, and also the data management team that have been greatly helpful with the QMF pack and the data quality control, and then also everyone else on the ocean and climate team. Thank you.
That's super, Felix. Thank you very much, and thank you for the nice video at the end. Okay, it's just 1:05. I'm going to take 5 minutes and I'm just going to flick through some of the quick questions. If there are people ready to do quick fire answers on our team, that would be great. And if not, we'll pick them up and Julie will circulate them as an email message. Michael McAuliffe, Ollie, is wondering, is there any plan to regulate inshore fisheries bivalves? BIM think there's 1,500 vessels operating in the sphere.
Michael, that's a complicated question indeed. Is it for? Do you mean for bivalves? If so, there are management measures in place already in the Irish Sea for razor clams. There's a weekly quota and advised total allowable catch, GPS monitoring of the fleet. So there's a number of things going on there. Michael said in crab and lobster, there's a management forum now established for the discussion of management of crab. There's recommendations going to the Minister on increasing minimum landing size and for clawing regulations, and those discussions will continue actually before Christmas, hopefully.
All right, thanks very much, Ollie. A question from Adam Ledbetter, which I think Dave Currie has answered. That's to do with the QMFs. So I'll pass on that one. Amy Geraghty, have you considered lodging voucher specimens? This is for Arjan. Voucher specimens of feral gigas or attached gigas in the Natural History Museums of Ulster or Dublin?
Now, that would be interesting, but we do not have those specimens. We do have DNA extracts of 120 specimens all around Ireland. If the museum actually does have a collection for DNA extracts, which can be quite interesting for population genetics of these oysters, I will be happy to also provide those.
Okay, thank you. And does oyster farming have any direct effect on the native oyster?
We did not specifically research that, but we can. I can say that, for example, in Lough Foyle, where there's lots of trestles now with Pacific oysters all around, it was apparent because it was strange that that was the only location where feral Pacific oysters had gone down in their population in comparison to 10 years ago. And I understand that it's also not going that well with the flat oysters in that region and with mussels. But we did not focus on that research question specifically, but I can imagine that all these things are related.
Thank you. And again, Arjan, can you share your wild native flat oyster data with Ollie Tully, please?
Yeah, I will send him an email.
Perfect. A question from Karen Dubsky, Coastwatch Ireland. Could you share whether you checked if these free oysters had evidence of having come from bags, presumably directly as escapes from bags or spillage? And she also puts a little note about the first observations were from native oyster fishermen in Swilly, confirmed by Coastwatch Ireland back in 2009. Yeah. But in terms of, is there evidence that they are spilt out of bags or have they bred out of bags?
We don't know exactly what happened, but let's say we did it the other way around. If there were bags close by and trestles, we were very critical before we would say that there were feral oysters settled in that region. We would only say that there are feral oysters settled if we would find oysters settled on certain hard substrata, or if they were, let's say, extremely irregularly formed. We actually found in virtually all places with trestles these perfectly formed, let's say, almost commercial-looking oysters next to the bag somewhere. So if we would have scored those all, I think that would not be completely honest.
Okay, thank you. And then the final one, I think, for you. Did you check feral oysters for reproductive condition?
The main thing that with the feral oysters, what we did look at is based on the size, we looked at whether we could find several clearly different generations in a certain region. That was that we could get quite clearly from our data set. So in certain areas, you would really find only one size class, as if there was only one settlement event there. But we did not look that much in detail yet, but that can be taken from the data that we have.
Okay. Thanks, Arjan. Demo on aquaculture is outstanding. Thanks, guys. Are the Power BI dashboards openly accessible? That's for our data team.
Yeah, Russell, I put a message, or we have a message put in there. The specific one that Rob showed, the data granular one, isn't available yet, but will be in the near future. There's other ones that are already available that are put up there.
Okay, so just to reiterate, there are links in the chat which you can use to download. Thank you. I think that's nearly it. Thanks to all the presenters, crab and lobster. There's a link there to the aquaculture sites viewer as well on the dafmaps.marine.ie aquaculture viewer. Okay, let's draw to a close. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to the support crew, Finola and Julie, and our IT guys if they were called upon. And thank you to everyone for attending. We've had over 100. I think we maxed out at 103 participants, which was outstanding. So have a nice lunch. Thank you, everybody. All the best.